So now we're going to start building a rig to aim the eyes of our character. You could simply go in and rotate the eye geometry, but I like to actually not put any keyframes on the geometry itself, and rather using secondary objects or the parents or the geometry constrained to certain objects as a driver. So in this case, let's open the hypergraph. So here are the eyes. And their parents, I have two locators. One is eye locator, which I'll use as the controlled object in an aim constraint, and then an off locator, which I'll use to add offsets to. So first let's create a simple controller object, and I'm going to use a NURB circle, create NURBS circle. Let's open the option box. So here we can see that Z is pointing forward. So I'm going to select the normal axis and change it to Z. Let's expand this a bit. I'm going to keep the degree at cubic, but change the number of sections to 18. Let's create that. I'm going to quickly position this. Well, first I'm going to rename it. Okay. Now to position it, I'm going to select two of the left and right eye locators, shift select this controller object, and then select constrain point. So here we can see we've centered our object right in between the eyes. So now I'm just going to translate it forward. Okay, and then display the CVs on this object. So display, NURBS components, CVs. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the front view and start scaling the vertices of this so that we have something of a mask shaped object. So I'm going to start by selecting these, switching to component mode, switching the center vertices, and then with the scale tool I'll scale them down. Select all these and scale them a little wider. Basically what I'm doing is just shaping this really quickly to form something of a mask. And I'll mostly use the scale tool to do this. This shape is fairly arbitrary. You can create this type of controller, once again, save it out into a directory and reuse it later, or you can tailor it for each particular character's eye shape. Okay, so this looks pretty good actually. I'm going to stop here. Okay, so there's our eye controller. Let's turn off our CVs. We don't need that display anymore. Now you can see we have translate values on this. So I'm going to create an empty group node, parent it to our IAIM controller, and then zero out the translates. So now it's centered on its parent. Relative to its parent, it has 0 translation offsets. Unparent this, then when I parent if we look at these, they both have the same translate values, or in the same space. So when I parent the IAIM controller to this empty group node, relative to its parent, it has 0 translation, rotation, or scale offsets. So I'm going to rename this. Okay, so this is actually what we're going to control. We're only going to use translates on this. So I'm going to hide the visibility, and the rotates and scales, I'm going to lock and hide those. Okay, so we can translate this about. So now I'm going to create a couple of locators. We're going to use as the aiming objects for these eyes. So create locator, hit the G key once again. I'm going to position these locators by just simply parenting them to a corresponding left or right eye locator. Once again, by simply zeroing their translate values, I center them right within these spherical eyes. I'm going to unparent them by selecting Edit, Unparent. And parent these two locators to the eye aim control. Now in Z, which is the forward pointing translation axis, I'm going to set their Z to 0 so that they're centered right within the eye aim controller. I'm going to leave the X offset, which corresponds to the center of the eye. Now next I'm going to duplicate these, select them, edit, duplicate, then parent them to each of their the objects that they were duplicated from. So now these have clean translate and rotate values. So I'm actually going to aim toward these objects. I need one more thing, and those will be up vectors for my aim constraints. So that way if the character is moving in space or the head is turning, relative to the head, I'll always have an up vector position for the eye aim constraint defined. So once again, let's create two more locators and quickly rename these. So cave 01 R eye up and L eye up. Once again, I'm going to parent these to a corresponding left or right eye locator that's already centered in the eye. Then zero the translate values. I'm just going to simply translate these up in Y. Now unparent them, edit, unparent. So these I'm going to parent to one of the head joints. Actually the topmost head joint. So I'll select the head joint last and hit P. So now if I rotate the head back, which has the eyes as a child, these up vectors follow along with it. Meaning that if we step up, relative to the eyes, the up vector locators will always stay in a constant relationship. Okay, So now we have all the components we need to build our aim constraint. I'm going to change the local scale on these. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to aim each eye to this locator, the last locator in the stack here that's parented to the iAim controller. So I'm going to select the locator, shift select the eye locator, then select constrain, aim, and option box. Let's reset this. So Z is the forward pointing axis on the locator. So I'm going to change my aim vector to 1 in Z. My up vector is already set to Y, which points straight up toward the up vector. Now I need to change the vector type to object and then type in the name of these up vector I locators. In this case, K01 L I up. Okay, so there's the first aim constraint. Let's create the second. Leave everything as is, just change the side or name of the world up object. So now when we look at the eyes, you can see, I'll zoom into the eyes a bit more. Okay. So now I'm moving the iAim controller, and you can see that it's how it's controlling the eye. Okay, so I'm going to add one more thing to this. I'm going to add a control so that we can, using these offsets, subtly shift each eye. Because sometimes in some poses, let's say for instance if this character is looking to the side here, you may want to change the angle of this eye slightly to make him look, more or less cross-eyed. So we're just going to add that rotate Y in. Give the animator a little more flexibility. So we're going to add a couple of attributes onto the iAim controller, which will be left and right. We'll call it eye shift. So with the iAim controller selected, I'm going to select channels, add attribute, L underscore I shift. We'll leave it as a float. The default value will set to 0. Add. I'm going to add one more, R underscore I shift. Once again, set the default to 0. So now we have two attributes, which at this point do nothing on our character. Okay. So now with this, these two attributes created, I'm going to create a set-driven key. Actually, I'm going to go in and edit these attributes and set an upper and lower limit. So what I've done is I selected the attribute and then selected Edit Attribute. When you click on the attribute, it shows that it's keyable, but I'm also I'm enabling has minimum and has maximum. So I'm going to set the minimum to -10 and the maximum to 10 on each of these. This will be the range of these attributes. Okay, so now I'm going to proceed to create a set-driven key relationship for each of these eyes. So with the IAIM controller selected, I'm going to select Animate, Set-Driven Key, Set, then open the option box for that tool. Then hit Load Driver, since these eye shift attributes will drive the rotation of this offset locator. So I'm going to select the eye off locators and load those into the driven channel. Okay, so I'm going to select the LI shift, select the LI offset, and then select the rotate Y, hit key, so that's the default pose, and repeat that with the right control objects. I'm going to go back to the LI shift and the LI offset and set the LI shift attribute to -10. So for this, we'll set a standard saying that -10 will rotate a certain amount toward the tear duct, and then positive will rotate in the opposite direction. So for -10, let's say we'll rotate this -45. Key that, and then for +10, we'll rotate our eye offset +45 and Y. Okay, so reset that to 0, the eye shift attribute. Now let's repeat that process with the right eye off shift, as well as the right eye shift, as well as the right eye offset. Okay, so once again, -10 will rotate, in this case 45 degrees, in toward the tear duct, and then +10 in the opposite direction. So in this case, -45. It's key. Set this attribute to 0. See what we have. I select both of them. That's the effect that we have. So if I go in and move this about, I want to bring this in a bit. I have a little added control on each eye. So zero these out. It returns to the default. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. An IAIM controller